They didn't arrive quietly. They didn't arrive unnoticed. And they definitely didn't arrive in control. U.S. Special Forces touched down in Baghdad with a clear mission: reinforce presence, project strength, send a message. Instead, within moments, they were caught in something far more revealing: a coordinated strike that turned their arrival into exposure. Missiles, drones, fire inside the base, ambulances rushing out. And a question that wouldn't be answered until much later: who was really setting the pace here? What stands out to me is not just the violence of the reception, but the timing. This wasn't a random hit. It unfolded at Victory Base Complex, right next to Baghdad International Airport, a location that isn't just strategic, but exposed, audible, and highly visible. When something happens there, the city feels it. And Baghdad felt this. The sequence begins before the impact. Transport aircraft moving in under aerial cover. That kind of deployment doesn't suggest routine rotation. It suggests urgency, possibly even concern. The kind of movement you don't advertise unless you believe you have to act quickly. And yet, the moment boots hit the ground, the sky shifts from controlled airspace to incoming threat vectors. Sirens, intercept attempts, and then the unmistakable pattern: combined missile and drone assault. This matters because it tells us something deeper. Reinforcements are supposed to stabilize a situation. But here, their arrival seems to have triggered a response almost immediately, which raises an uncomfortable possibility: this movement wasn't just observed. It was anticipated. And anticipation changes everything. Reports of fires inside the complex followed quickly. Ambulances leaving the base toward clinics across Baghdad. At that point, official statements become almost irrelevant. The city already understands the language: sirens, smoke, urgency. War doesn't need confirmation when it's that visible. In Washington, the narrative leaned toward defense, reinforcing a protective shield, securing assets. But from Baghdad's perspective, a shield can also function as a signal. It tells your adversary exactly where to look, exactly where to focus. And when air defenses activate, they don't just protect. They reveal anxiety. They confirm expectation of attack. Days earlier, tensions were already building. Rocket and drone strikes had targeted U.S. diplomatic infrastructure near the airport. The pressure wasn't hypothetical. It was ongoing, which makes this escalation feel less like an isolated incident and more like a continuation, only sharper, more deliberate. At the same time, another layer was unfolding on the ground. Additional U.S. Special Operations units were being deployed into Iraq, again centered around the airport. Military transports, escorted movements. This doesn't resemble advisory presence. It suggests operational intent. A shift. Possibly even the opening phase of something larger. And that's where the narrative begins to fracture. Because when forces arrive with that level of urgency, they bring more than capability. They bring uncertainty. Even mistrust. There were reports, quiet but telling, of Iraqi soldiers having their phones confiscated following a raid on a brigade headquarters within the airport perimeter. That detail might seem minor at first. It isn't. Controlling information flow at that level implies fear of leaks. And fear of leaks suggests internal fragility. What many people overlook is how quickly alliances can become strained under pressure. Iraq, formerly a partner, becomes in practice a variable. Not entirely predictable. Not entirely aligned. And in that environment, every base becomes more than a military site. It becomes a political symbol. A target layered with meaning. Now, step back for a second. Because there's another concept floating through the situation, one that doesn't always get said out loud: Plan B. When initial strategies fail to produce results, after weeks of airstrikes, pressure campaigns, limited deterrence, something else has to fill the gap. And that something else often comes in the form of special operations. Flexible, discreet, high risk. From where I'm standing, this deployment fits that pattern. But here's the problem with improvisation in a conflict like this. The other side reads it too. If Iran interpreted this redeployment as preparation for a more aggressive phase, potentially targeting strategic sites like Karg Island or conducting operations against aligned militias, then the strike on Victory Base begins to look less like retaliation and more like preemption. A message sent early. We see you. You're late. And we're already moving. The implications are significant, because the more ambitious the operation, the more vulnerable its support structure becomes. Logistics corridors, air routes, supply chains. Baghdad as a hub doesn't forgive exposed infrastructure. It amplifies it. That's the irony that seems to be unfolding here. An attempt to project strength ends up multiplying pressure points. Instead of isolating the conflict, it stretches it across multiple fronts. And once that happens, control becomes harder to maintain. Meanwhile, Iraq itself remains in a delicate balance. U.S. military presence has long been described, especially locally, as a magnet for instability. Attacks become cyclical. Responses don't always align with Baghdad's own priorities. Sovereignty becomes blurred. And within that ambiguity, every incident risks escalating beyond its initial scope. Victory Base carries historical weight too. For years, it stood as one of the largest U.S. installations in Iraq. Parts of it were later repurposed for diplomatic functions. The labels changed. The footprint didn't. And neither did its symbolic value. While Baghdad was absorbing the shock, another signal emerged, this time from Israel. An Iranian strike reportedly hit a military logistics facility in central Israel, with satellite imagery suggesting fire damage. Not confirmed in full detail, but the indicators were there. Thermal anomalies detected through NASA-based monitoring systems. That matters, because it suggests capacity, the ability to operate across multiple theaters almost simultaneously. Not just localized response, but distributed pressure. The pattern itself is telling. Missiles combined with drones. It's not just about impact. It's about saturation, forcing air defenses to activate, consuming interceptors, overloading surveillance systems, creating confusion. You don't need to occupy territory to disrupt it. You just need to prove you can reach it. And once that proof is established, the narrative shifts. Total superiority becomes harder to sustain as an idea. Because if a base receiving emergency reinforcements ends up with fires and casualties, the optics change. Reinforcement starts to look like reaction. And reaction in warfare is always one step behind initiative. At this point, it's worth asking something directly. Do you think this was a calculated warning, or the opening move of a broader escalation? Give us your opinion in the comment box below. Because the episode at Victory Base doesn't exist in isolation. It's part of a wider pulse. One that has already touched U.S. infrastructure in Baghdad, triggered air defense systems, and extended outward. According to Reuters, defensive systems were activated again following drone threats to diplomatic facilities near the airport. The pattern repeats. Pressure accumulates. And then it jumps. Far beyond Iraq. Reports indicated that ballistic missiles reached Diego Garcia, a critical US-UK base in the Indian Ocean. Even the suggestion of that reach forces a different conversation. Capability. Intent. We're no longer looking at a contained regional dynamic. Something broader is being tested. If the intention behind deploying special forces was to quietly shift the balance, the outcome suggests something else entirely. Arriving discreetly and ending up under immediate attack is not just a tactical setback. It's a narrative loss. The initiative slips. And once initiative is lost in the Middle East, regaining it becomes exponentially more difficult. There's also the internal dimension. Confiscating phones from Iraqi personnel introduces another layer of tension. It signals distrust within the alliance. And that kind of friction creates vulnerabilities that external actors can exploit. An external strike can quickly become a domestic crisis. Then there's the shadow factor, the persistent mention of possible external agents, infiltration, indirect involvement. These elements are hard to verify, but they shape perception. And perception in conflict zones can be as destabilizing as reality. What makes this episode particularly damaging for Washington isn't just the attack itself. It's the timing. Special forces arriving under protection, and almost immediately losing control of the situation. If the goal was to reinforce presence, what the world saw was exposure. And that changes how future moves will be interpreted. If you're still watching, it means you're not just following headlines, you're trying to understand the deeper mechanics behind them. Before we close, consider this. If escalating pressure keeps triggering faster and more coordinated responses, how long before every reinforcement becomes a liability instead of an advantage? The events in Baghdad suggest a hard truth. Reinforcements don't guarantee control. Plan B doesn't always stabilize a situation. Sometimes it accelerates it. In this case, Iran demonstrated that it could anticipate movement and act before the strategy fully unfolded. That alone shifts the balance. Winners and losers here aren't defined only by casualties. Iran gains strategic signaling power. It shows reach, timing, and adaptability. The United States, at least in this moment, absorbs a perception hit, its movements exposed, its response reactive. Iraq remains caught in between, its territory once again serving as the stage for external confrontation. And the broader context matters. This isn't just Baghdad. It's a network of tensions stretching from the Gulf to the Indian Ocean, touching Israel, testing alliances, probing limits. The next phase may not begin with a declaration. It may begin with another arrival. And another strike waiting for it. Subscribe if you haven't already because we're tracking the evolution of this story day by day. Make sure to activate notifications and don't miss our next report. And remember, you can now become a channel member if you believe in this project and want to see it grow. Your support makes all the difference. If you'd like to support our channel financially, which we greatly appreciate, you can do so through Patreon and PayPal. The link is in the video description.